It's 4:45 a.m. on a cold December morning in Chicago. The temperature hovers at 28 degrees, and fresh snow blankets the streets of the West Side. Inside apartment 2337 West Monroe Street, 9 members of the Black Panther Party are sleeping, exhausted from another late night of organising breakfast programmes and medical clinics. A People's gas truck pulls up outside, its engine cutting through the pre-dawn silence. But this isn't a routine service call. 14 plainclothes Chicago police officers file out, carrying pistols, shotguns, a Thompson submachine gun, and something even more deadly. A detailed floor plan marking exactly where 21-year-old Fred Hampton is sleeping beside his pregnant fiancée. In precisely 3 minutes, they will fire 99 bullets into this apartment. Mark Clark will die instantly, a bullet through his heart. Fred Hampton will be executed in his bed, shot twice in the head at point-blank range while he lay drugged and unconscious. The officers will later claim self-defence. The evidence will show only one shot was fired by the Panthers, and that was reflexive, as Clark died. This is the story of how the United States government orchestrated the assassination of Fred Hampton, the most dangerous black revolutionary they'd ever faced. We've reconstructed the entire murder to show you exactly how the FBI, Chicago police, and a trusted informant coordinated to eliminate a man whose only crime was uniting poor people across racial lines. But before we examine that blood-soaked morning, we need to understand something crucial. Just 6 days after Hampton's murder, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover would write a letter to Chicago FBI agent Roy Martin Mitchell. The letter, suppressed for 50 years until a Freedom of Information Act request in January 2021, read, "I am certainly pleased to commend you and to advise you that I have approved an incentive award in the amount of $200 for your outstanding services in a matter of considerable interest to the FBI in the racial field." The racial field, not criminal, not security, racial. This was never about law enforcement. It was about race war. To understand why the government was so terrified of a 21-year-old community organiser that they had to murder him in his sleep, we need to understand what Fred Hampton had accomplished in just 2 years with the Black Panthers, and to understand that, we need to go back to Maywood, Illinois, where a teenager watched Emmett Till's mother weep and decided that revolution was the only answer. Frederick Allen Hampton was born on August 30th, 1948, in Summit, Illinois, but grew up in Maywood, a Chicago suburb. He was the youngest of Frances and Iberia Hampton's 3 children. The Hamptons weren't poor. Frances worked at the corn products plant in Argo. Iberia was a homemaker. They owned their house, had 2 cars, lived the black middle-class dream. But Maywood in the 1950s was still segregated, still violent, still teaching black children their place. The defining moment of Fred's childhood came through a family connection. His mother had babysat Emmett Till when he was younger. In 1955, when Till was tortured and lynched in Mississippi at 14 years old, the Hampton family grieved as if they'd lost their own. 7-year-old Fred saw the photographs in Jet magazine. Till's mutilated face, his mother Mamie's unbearable grief. "That could have been me," Hampton later said. "That could have been any of us." But young Fred wasn't content to simply fear. He studied. He read everything. Marx, Lenin, Mao, Fanon, Malcolm X. By age 10, he was quoting passages from the Communist Manifesto to his confused elementary school teachers. By 15, he could explain the relationship between capitalism and racism better than most college professors. His heroes weren't athletes or entertainers, they were revolutionaries, particularly Jomo Kenyatta and the Mau Mau fighters in Kenya, who were waging armed struggle against British colonialism. By high school, Fred was already organising. At Proviso East High School, he led campaigns for more black teachers and administrators. When the school had never had a black homecoming queen, Hampton organised until they elected one. When the local pool was whites only, he organised trips for black children to an integrated pool 5 miles away. But trips weren't enough. Hampton wanted that pool integrated. In the summer of 1965, Hampton led protests at the Maywood Pool. The demonstrations turned violent. Windows were broken, a storage shed set on fire. Police arrested Hampton and 17 others for mob action and disorderly conduct. But the protests worked. The village board approved an integrated pool. Today it's called the Fred Hampton Family Aquatic Centre. Hampton was 17 years old and had already won his first battle against institutional racism. At Triton Junior College, Hampton studied pre-law and dreamed of becoming a lawyer like his hero, NAACP attorney Benjamin Crump. He joined the NAACP's West Suburban branch, quickly becoming head of their youth council. He organised rallies, voter registration drives, educational programmes. But the NAACP's respectability politics frustrated him. They wanted to work within the system. Hampton was starting to believe the system itself was the problem. The NAACP leadership told him to wear suits, speak softly, appeal to white conscience. Hampton watched as civil rights workers were beaten, bombed and shot while practicing non-violence. He watched Martin Luther King Jr. get stabbed, firebombed, and finally assassinated. They'll kill us whether we're peaceful or not, Hampton concluded, so we might as well die fighting. Everything changed in October 1966 when Huey Newton and Bobby Seale founded the Black Panther Party for self-defense in Oakland, California. Their 10-point program demanded what the NAACP would never ask for: land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, peace, immediate end to police brutality, exemption from military service, freedom for all black prisoners, and black juries for black defendants. When Hampton read it, he knew he'd found his calling. In November 1968, Hampton helped establish the Illinois chapter of the Black Panthers, becoming chairman almost immediately. His charisma was undeniable, his organising skills unmatched. Within months, the Illinois Panthers grew from a handful of members to hundreds. But Hampton wasn't interested in black nationalism or separatism. He was interested in revolution. We got to face some facts, Hampton would say at rallies. That the masses are poor, that the masses belong to what you call the lower class. And when I talk about the masses, I'm talking about the white masses. I'm talking about the black masses and the brown masses and the yellow masses too. We've got to face the fact that some people say, you fight fire best with fire, but we say you put fire out best with water. We say you don't fight racism with racism. We're going to fight racism with solidarity. We say you don't fight capitalism with no black capitalism. You fight capitalism with socialism. These weren't just words. Hampton created something unprecedented, the original Rainbow Coalition. Not Jesse Jackson's later version, but a street-level alliance between the Black Panthers, the Puerto Rican Young Lords, and most shocking of all, the Young Patriots, poor white migrants from Appalachia who wore Confederate flag patches. The coalition negotiations were legendary. Hampton would sit down with white kids wearing Confederate flags and say, "That flag represents the enslavement of my people, but I'll work with you if you understand we have the same enemy." He convinced them to add a free Huey Newton patch next to their rebel flags. He got Puerto Rican nationalists to march with Southern whites. He turned the Blackstone Rangers, one of Chicago's most violent gangs, into political activists. The coalition was revolutionary because it was based on class, not race. Hampton convinced white kids with rebel flags to march alongside Black Panthers, not by lecturing them about racism, but by showing them their common enemy, capitalism. "You're poor, we're poor," he told them. "Let's get together and fight the real enemy." Meanwhile, the Illinois Panthers launched survival programs that put the government to shame. The Free Breakfast for Children program was the crown jewel. Every morning at 6 a.m, Panthers would arrive at churches and community centres to cook breakfast. By 7 a.m, children would line up for free hot meals, eggs, bacon, toast, grits, fresh fruit, milk. No questions asked, no means testing, no bureaucracy, just food for hungry kids. The program fed 20,000 children weekly in Chicago alone. Church congregations that had been sceptical of the violent Panthers watched these young revolutionaries tenderly serving children breakfast and began to support them. Parents who might have feared the Panthers' guns trusted them with their kids' nutrition. Even the government later admitted the Panther Breakfast program was the inspiration for the federal school breakfast program. But the FBI saw it differently. In an internal memo, Hoover wrote, "The BCP, Breakfast for Children program, represents the best and most influential activity going for the BPP, Black Panther Party, and, as such, is potentially the greatest threat to efforts by authorities to neutralise the BPP and destroy what it stands for." Imagine that. Feeding hungry children was considered a threat to national security. The People's Free Medical Center was equally revolutionary. Panthers commandeered a trailer, equipped it with medical supplies, some liberation from hospitals, some donated by sympathetic doctors, and provided free healthcare to anyone who walked in. No insurance needed, no paperwork, no payment. They did basic checkups, tested for sickle cell anemia, treated injuries, provided prenatal care. Medical students from Northwestern University volunteered, teaching Panthers basic medical skills. The Panthers also ran liberation schools, teaching children black history that public schools ignored. They organised free clothing drives, giving away thousands of coats during Chicago's brutal winters. They provided free legal aid, helping people navigate the court system. They even started a free ambulance service because Chicago ambulances often refused to enter black neighbourhoods. But perhaps most threatening to the establishment was Hampton's political education. At 20 years old, he could break down complex theory into street language anyone could understand. Socialism is the people, he'd explain. If you walked into a community and everything was for the people, the hospitals, the schools, the housing, that's socialism. What we have now is everything for the profit. That's capitalism. Hampton held political education classes every week, teaching Marx and Lenin to former gang members, Mao's Little Red Book to high school dropouts. He'd relate everything to their daily struggles. Why does your landlord charge you $200 for a rat-infested apartment? Because under capitalism, housing is a commodity, not a right. Why do hospitals turn away sick people? Because under capitalism, healthcare is for profit, not people. This political clarity terrified authorities. Here was a 21-year-old black revolutionary who could quote Marx, organise breakfast programs, unite street gangs, and build multiracial coalitions. He wasn't just feeding people, he was teaching them why they were hungry. He wasn't just providing healthcare, he was explaining why they were sick. He was politicising poverty, and that made him deadly dangerous. The FBI had been watching Hampton since 1967 through COINTELPRO counterintelligence program, their illegal operation to prevent the rise of a black messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. The program's methods included infiltration, psychological warfare, legal harassment, and assassination. Former FBI agent Wesley Swearingen later testified, "We were directed to destroy the Black Panther Party by any means necessary." By 1968, they had their inside man, William O'Neill, a 17-year-old black teenager facing felony charges for impersonating a federal officer and interstate car theft. FBI Special Agent Roy Mitchell offered him a deal: infiltrate the Panthers and the charges disappear. O'Neill accepted, becoming Hampton's bodyguard, head of security, and eventually his Judas. O'Neill was the perfect informant. Young, street-smart, eager to prove himself, he quickly rose through Panther ranks, becoming Hampton's personal bodyguard and head of security. The FBI paid him $300 monthly, plus bonuses for special information. In return, O'Neill provided floor plans of Panther homes, lists of members, weapons inventories. He also acted as a provocateur, constantly pushing for more militant action, creating fake security threats to justify increasingly aggressive Panther rhetoric. O'Neill's sabotage went beyond information gathering. He would create conflicts between Panthers and other groups. He'd spread rumours about members being informants, creating paranoia and division. He once gave Panthers a recipe for Molotov cocktails that would explode in their hands. Another time, he suggested bombing City Hall, an idea Hampton immediately rejected. "We're not anarchists," Hampton told him. "We're revolutionary socialists." The FBI's war against Hampton intensified throughout 1969. They forged letters between the Panthers and the Blackstone Rangers, trying to provoke gang warfare. They sent anonymous letters to Hampton's mother, claiming her son was marked for death by his own comrades. They planted negative stories in newspapers, calling Panthers black racists and police killers. They arrested Hampton repeatedly on fabricated charges, stealing ice cream, mob action, even an absurd charge of distributing literature without a permit. By November 1969, tensions were exploding. On November 13th, 2 Chicago cops, John Gilhooly and Frank Rappaport, were killed in a shootout with Panthers. Hampton was in California at the time, speaking at UCLA, but State's Attorney Edward Hanrahan blamed him anyway, calling him the architect of violence. The stage was set for what Hanrahan would call justifiable retaliation. On November 19th, Hampton gave a speech at the University of Northern Illinois. O'Neill was driving. On the way back, police stopped them. O'Neill was released immediately, a red flag Hampton should have noticed. Hampton was arrested on a 2-year-old charge of stealing $71 worth of ice cream bars from a Maywood vendor, a charge everyone knew was fabricated. He posted bail on November the 26th. He had 9 days to live. The FBI knew they were running out of time. Hampton's influence was growing exponentially. He'd been invited to meet with the National Panthers in Oakland. There was talk of him replacing David Hilliard as National Chief of Staff. Some whispered he might become chairman after Bobby Seale. A charismatic 21-year-old who could unite races and radicalise the poor as a national leader, that couldn't happen. On December 3rd, 1969, the FBI finalised their plan. The raid would happen that night. O'Neill was crucial. He would drug Hampton to ensure he couldn't wake up and defend himself. That evening, O'Neill cooked dinner for the Panthers at the Monroe Street apartment. Soul food, everyone remembered. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread. Multiple survivors remember him insisting everyone eat, especially Hampton. "Chairman, you need your strength," he kept saying. After dinner, O'Neill made Kool-Aid, preparing a special glass for Hampton with extra sugar and a massive dose of secabarbital, a powerful barbiturate. Within an hour, Hampton was unconscious on his bed, unable to be roused even as his comrades tried to wake him for a late meeting. "Let the chairman rest," O'Neill told them. "He's been working too hard." At midnight, O'Neill slipped out, claiming he had to meet his mother. He called his FBI handler Roy Mitchell from a gas station payphone at Roosevelt and Halstead, confirming Hampton was unconscious and providing the apartment's current layout, who was sleeping where weapons were stored, and most importantly confirming Hampton was in the back bedroom and wouldn't wake up. Mitchell immediately contacted Sergeant Daniel Groth of the Chicago Police Department's Special Prosecutions Unit. Groth assembled his assault team, 14 officers armed with 5 shotguns, 1 Thompson submachine gun, 1 carbine rifle, 6.38 caliber pistols, and 1.357 Magnum. They had a search warrant for illegal weapons signed by Judge Robert Collins. But this wasn't about weapons. Internal police memos later revealed the mission objective: neutralize Fred Hampton. At 4 a.m. on December the 4th, 1969, the assault team met for final briefing. They studied O'Neill's floor plan one last time. Groth emphasised, "Hampton's in the back bedroom. He's the target." Officer James Davis would later testify he was specifically assigned to take care of Hampton. At 4:30 a.m, they surrounded the apartment. Mark Clark was on security duty in the front room, having dozed off in a chair with a shotgun in his lap. 8 other Panthers were sleeping throughout the apartment. Fred Hampton was in the back bedroom with his fiancée, Deborah Johnson, now known as Aquan Jerry, who was 8.5 months pregnant. Sergeant Groth knocked on the door, allegedly announcing police. Before anyone could respond, they broke down the door and immediately opened fire. The first shot killed Mark Clark instantly, straight through the heart. As he fell, his finger reflexively pulled the shotgun trigger, firing the only shot the Panthers would manage that morning into the ceiling. Officer Joseph Gorman entered first with his machine gun, spraying the apartment. The Panthers, awakening to gunfire and plaster exploding from walls, tried desperately to surrender. "Stop shooting! We have a pregnant woman in here," Deborah Johnson screamed. The shooting paused briefly. During this lull, Hampton still hadn't moved. Harold Bell, sleeping, in the same room, shook him desperately. "Chairman, wake up. The pigs are vamping." Hampton, heavily drugged, only managed to lift his head slightly before falling back unconscious. The police regrouped and fired again. This time, they targeted Hampton's bedroom specifically, firing through the walls. Officer Edward Carmody shot through the bedroom door with his .30 caliber rifle. 1 bullet struck Hampton in the shoulder. He still didn't move. When the second barrage ended, the surviving Panthers were dragged into the living room. Officers secured the apartment, moving room to room. That's when Officer Joseph Gorman and another officer entered Hampton's bedroom. Deborah Johnson was pulled from the bed and taken to the kitchen. She heard an officer say, "That's Fred Hampton." Another responded, "Is he dead? Bring him out." There was a pause, then 2 shots, point blank into Hampton's head. "He's good and dead now," an officer said. The officers carried Hampton's body into the living room and dumped it by the front door. Blood pooled on the floor, seeping between the floorboards. They arrested the 7 survivors, charging them with attempted murder of police officers and aggravated assault. Deborah Johnson, nearly 9 months pregnant, was held for hours without medical attention. At his press conference that afternoon, State's Attorney Hanrahan claimed his officers had been attacked by violent Black Panthers and showed bullet holes in the apartment walls as evidence of a fierce gun battle. He released photographs to newspapers, pointing to these holes as proof the Panthers had fired at police. But the Panthers refused to let the state control the narrative. Instead of cleaning the apartment, they turned it into a crime scene tour. Thousands of people, black and white, walked through to see for themselves. What they saw destroyed the official story. Those bullet holes Hanrahan showed, they were nail heads. Of the 99 shots fired, only one came from the Panthers, Mark Clark's dying reflex. The rest were incoming police bullets. The walls, doors and windows were riddled with entrance wounds, not exits. The blood patterns showed Hampton was shot in bed, not in any confrontation. The physical evidence proved this wasn't a shootout, it was an execution. The Chicago Tribune, initially supporting police, sent a reporter to investigate. His findings were damning. The police account appears to be false. The paper, hardly radical, called for a federal investigation. Even mainstream white media couldn't ignore the evidence. Community outrage was immediate and sustained. 5,000 people attended Hampton's funeral on December 9th. His body lay in state at Rayner Funeral Home as mourners filed past for hours. The funeral procession to Bethel Cemetery stretched for blocks. Jesse Jackson delivered the eulogy, calling Hampton the Crown Prince of the Black Revolution. Ralph Abernathy of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, who had taken over after King's assassination, came to Chicago. This vicious killing stands as one more example of the systematic repression of the black community, he declared. Even Roy Wilkins of the conservative NAACP condemned the killing. But the most powerful response came from Hampton's mother, Iberia. At the funeral, she stood before thousands and declared, "I'm not going to cry. Fred would not want me to cry. He'd want me to continue the struggle." She kept that promise, fighting for justice for her son until her death in 2021 at age 101. The cover-up began immediately. Police claimed they'd knocked and announced themselves, that the Panthers had fired first, that Hampton had been shooting from his bed. Every claim fell apart under scrutiny. Ballistics proved only one Panther shot. Chemistry tests found no gunpowder residue on Hampton's hands. The coroner confirmed he was drugged with massive amounts of secobarbital. In 1970, a federal grand jury investigation concluded the police had fired between 82 and 99 times, versus one shot from the Panthers. The grand jury called the raid ill-conceived, but refused to indict anyone. Hanrahan and 13 officers were charged with obstruction of justice by a special prosecutor. All were acquitted by a judge before the case reached a jury. But the families didn't give up. In 1970, they filed a civil lawsuit against the city, county and federal government. For 13 years, the case dragged through courts. Finally, in 1982, the government was forced to release documents showing the FBI's COINTELPRO operation had specifically targeted Hampton for neutralization. The documents were devastating. They showed FBI Director Hoover personally ordering Hampton's surveillance. They revealed O'Neill was paid a $300 bonus specifically for providing the floor plan used in the raid. They contained Hoover's letter to the Chicago FBI office, written December 10, 1969, 6 days after the assassination, praising them for their success and authorizing bonus payments. In 1983, the families reached a settlement, $1.85 million from the federal government, city and county. It was the first time the government had ever been forced to pay for assassinating a Black Panther. But no one was ever criminally convicted for Fred Hampton's murder. William O'Neill, the informant, lived with his betrayal for 20 years. In a 1989 interview for the documentary Eyes on the Prize, he tried to justify his actions. "I had no idea it would come to this." Hours after the interview aired, on January 15, 1990, Martin Luther King Day, O'Neill ran onto the Eisenhower Expressway and was killed by a car. His death was ruled a suicide. Today, December 4th is remembered as Chairman Fred Day in Chicago. The apartment building at 2337 West Monroe is gone, replaced by a vacant lot, but the site is hallmarked, and activists gather there each year. Hampton's childhood home in Maywood is a museum. The pool he integrated bears his name. Chicago Public Schools teach his speeches. But Hampton's greatest memorial is the continued struggle. The Rainbow Coalition model inspired generations of multiracial organizing. The breakfast program he started became the federal government's free breakfast program, feeding millions of children daily. The phrases he popularized, "all power to the people," "you can kill a revolutionary but you can't kill the revolution," still ring out at protests worldwide. Fred Hampton was 21 years old when he died. In 2 years with the Panthers, he accomplished more than most manage in full lifetimes. He united street gangs into political organizations, He fed thousands of hungry children. He provided free healthcare to communities the government abandoned. He built working-class solidarity across racial lines. He proved that ordinary people could create alternatives to capitalism, and that's exactly why he had to die. The assassination of Fred Hampton wasn't about one man. It was about destroying the possibility he represented, that poor people of all races could unite against their common oppressor. The FBI didn't just murder Fred Hampton, they murdered the revolution he was building. As Hampton himself said weeks before his death, "I'm going to die for the people because I love the people. I love the community, and I have faith in the community." He knew they were coming for him. He faced it without fear, because he understood something his killers never could. You can murder a revolutionary, but you can't murder the revolution. On that freezing December morning in 1969, 14 police officers following FBI orders pumped 99 bullets into an apartment full of sleeping people to kill one 21-year-old man. They shot him lying drugged and unconscious in his bed. They declared him good and dead. They thought they'd won, but Fred Hampton had already won. He'd shown America what freedom could look like, and 54 years later, we're still fighting to finish what he started. Power to the people.